Good morning. Good morning and a happy Monday morning. It's the Last Call podcast. Brian Scott, straight from his office. The coach, David Zimmerman from outside Schools Unknown here in beautiful Dallas, Texas. David, I have made it through the Boston blizzard back into what looks like beautiful sunshine that you are in here in Dallas, Texas. Welcome to the Last Call podcast. We thank you all for joining us, both on audio and for the first time, David, on video, where everybody can see your beautiful
How
palm.
about that? I know they have the steering wheel cam right now.
Hey, well, however we can do it, we're testing out the waters here of new technology. And we're going to have our Patreon feed coming soon, where you can access David and I's documentary opinions entitled Doc Talk, where it will come exclusively. We're going to have a little membership portal for those that want to help defray some of our technological costs, as we had Mike.
Membership portals.
Well, you know, we don't like asking straight out for money. You're better at that than I am, David. But you know, we'd like to upgrade the quality of the pod, and for those that see any value in our ramblings, you know, a couple of bucks, Starbucks a month.
Wait, aren't you in sales?
Yes.
Okay, I was just checking.
But we don't tell people that. So, David, let's get to the fun. We only have an hour today, and I feel like this is going to be a therapy session to some extent, as we are
therapy session. Yeah, I don't disagree.
A football therapy session is what we saw yesterday. And coming at watching the Cincinnati Bengals, by the way, I'm going to get sidetracked real quick. As somebody who has family members that are Cincinnati fans, is there a correct and incorrect pronunciation of Bengals?
No, because the cheerleaders are actually known as the Bengals. So Bengals is appropriate. And however you want to do that, you can.
Because Tony Romo was saying like Bengals and Bungles, and he had 4 different pronunciations during the 3 hours.
Brian, I'm gonna start off our first video pod by calling out you, Ben Rogers, you kiss tuchus human being who I know decently well. You who were trying to tell us how great Tony Romo was as you kissed his tuchus yesterday.
Ben Rogers was at the head of that train?
He sure was, talking about how great Romo was, and you should have seen the replies. Brian, I'm going to come out storming the castle today. Tony Romo might be the worst color commentator that I have ever heard do a professional football game. In the beginning, it was a fad. Then it became a little cute. Now it's not just nails on a chalkboard. It's legitimately like obnoxiously annoying, where you like want to mute your television. And by the way, I think we have a little rivalry between him and Troy Aikman. And you know what? Troy Aikman should have a rivalry, because Troy Aikman is actually classy and good at what he does. But Tony Romo is horrendous, Brian.
So a couple of things, and then I want to hear some more.
He's worse than Witten now, Brian, because unless Witten was dull and boring, Romo is obnoxious, annoying, and makes you want to throw something at the television. He's become a very unlikable character.
He's worse than watching the game with your annoying 8-year-old. So here's the beautiful thing. Troy Aikman, because he's so classy and doesn't make news about himself and just goes and does a professional job, has never been so popular than he has been in what I would call, from a broadcasting perspective. And David, I am not happy to admit this, but I do watch more Thursday nights. I mean, I watch more football than the average person. So I hear Troy every week.
And you were in the business. You are coming at it from a professional experience situation.
Troy works at his craft like he did at football.
He's been doing it, Brian, how many years now? How many years?
15. He's done 15 years.
And he's really good. Like
I think
really
he's at
good.
the top of his game. And these playoffs, he has been on point. He and Joe get each other. Joe can be a little corny and much, but Troy takes it, and it's great. On the other hand,
Troy actually offers real perspective for people that both know football and that people that don't know football.
well,
And it's
that's
really
my biggest
interesting.
that's my biggest criticism. So yesterday, we have Tony Romo talking from the perspective of a quarterback that has had to make decisions that would or would not take his team to the Super Bowl. Can you tell me when that game was that Tony played in that affected whether or not his team went to the Super Bowl?
Yeah,
He just sounded disingenuous.
He sounds like a fraud. He sounds like a total fraud playing a caricature that people thought in the beginning was some cutesy whatever, and he got
And it was
paid big
because it
bucks
was
for it.
different. I think because it was different.
Yeah, and then I think what people realized is he has nothing to add. He has nothing from a big time. At least when you watch the Mannings, who are gold and are hilarious, at least they have credibility. They have 4 Super Bowl victories between them. They were the best at their craft when they were playing. They were in all of those pressured situations. They have the uniqueness of being brothers. When you listen to Troy Aikman,
they were relevant every year on the field. One of those.
Can I ask you, Brian, can I ask you a better question? I think this is far more noteworthy because they're going to say it's like I guess I'm qualified for this, Brian, more than you, but this is a good statement that you would say. It would be like if Brian Scott is doing play-by-play, right? Brian Scott never played the sport. So you have some people that will be very critical of that. If I'm doing color commentary for basketball, Brian, people will say, well, he's a coach and he's won state championships, so he at least knows what he's talking about. But here's my problem. Find me another color commentator. I'm literally just thinking about this off the top of my head. Maybe you'll correct me. All these guys that get the color commentating positions, all these guys that get the studio gigs. Brian, haven't all of them either been to a Super Bowl or won a Super Bowl if I rack my brain a little bit?
Except for the tight end for the Panthers, who Greg Olsen,
who's brand new.
Brand new first year. He's the only one I can think of. Or you're a Dallas Cowboy. Because you can't tell me that Jason Witten gets that job if he plays 15 years for the Seahawks.
But Jason Witten is going down as one of the great tight ends of all time. He's going to be in Canton, and so he will have credibility. He will have credibility.
But he didn't play for a Super Bowl winning franchise, is my point.
True. He didn't play in those types of games. I agree with you. Again, that's a fair statement. But by the way, Jason Witten is no longer on the air.
Because you can only fake it for so much. So here's where I landed on Tony. See, last week, I think this podcast a week ago comes off very differently because I think Tony came across last week because of the way that game went down as it was good for his style. Let's put it that way.
Really?
It was this frantic. Well, let me tell you why. It was frantic. It was impromptu. It was like street football those last 3 minutes, sort of like the last minute of the Cowboys-Niners game. Just like when Tony was in Dallas. When the play broke down, Tony was better when he was improvising.
But Tony, do you know who he reminds me of? I was thinking about this the other night. I'm watching a replay of the Royal Rumble. And they now have this clown, Pat McAfee, whatever his name is, doing color commentary.
We don't have time to go down that road.
Yeah. But what I'm saying to you is
the highest paid. He's paid more than Romo now,
Right. But Brian, here's the thing. WWE is scripted entertainment, and those announcers are there specifically to play a role like they would in a movie or a sitcom or something. They're actors. Exactly. They're actors. So when you're watching the Royal Rumble or you're watching a wrestling event, They are purposely doing things like saying, I think that Bobby Lashley is going to win. He's the one who's going to win it. He's going to be the champion. And then 2 seconds later, it's going to be Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns is going to win the championship. And Tony Romo is doing the same crap in that Buffalo Bills Kansas City Chiefs game. Buffalo is going to go to the Super Bowl. I know it, Jim. Kansas City is going back to the Super Bowl, Jim. And it's
I am so
ingenuous.
glad you are saying this.
It's obnoxious. It's not, I don't think, what people want. I think people like having fun. I think people don't mind when it's not just straight arrow the way it used to be. That's what John Madden was so great at. But again, Brian, I think the biggest problem is he lacks credibility. I think that's the issue.
But I'm so glad what you just said is exactly right, because yesterday, when the game wasn't like that one the week before, he failed miserably because it wasn't this schoolyard festivus in a frenzy. I'm so happy to be here. I'm gonna pee my pants, Jim.
Yes.
Make a call, Jim. Instead, he sounded in that last minute and a half like he had never watched a football game, had no idea of basic strategy.
He was making mistake after mistake
and
after
it was
mistake.
Blatant because he couldn't, because yesterday called for some nuance and not rah-rah. And all he can do is be a cheerleader.
Yes, and if you listen to...
And that's my frustration. They paid $20 million a year for a cheerleader.
Yes, and if you listen to the difference between... I'll do 3 comparisons here, Brian. One, the comparison between Joe Buck and Aikman doing the 49er Rams game, which is you're feeling just as intense, just as on the edge.
Not sure which way it's going to go.
Correct. And you're getting great play-by-play, great commentary, great analysis of what could happen.
Because, and I'll tell you, you know that Troy Aikman, and if you live here, you've heard it on radio show, Troy Aikman is not the biggest Jimmy G fan. He loves Matthew Stafford because he's followed his career living in Dallas.
Yes.
He wanted Jimmy G to fail and thinks that he's not great, but you couldn't tell that in the broadcast.
He's a professional. And then you do the contrast, Brian, between the Manning brothers, who are not the focus is not the game when you watch the Manning brothers. The focus is they're doing a variety act. They're doing shtick, and it's great. It's great, and you know that that's what you're tuning in for.
And it's especially great when the Seahawks are playing the Lions.
Brian, just like if you're going to watch Nickelodeon Slime, the Tony Romo crap is A, he has no credibility. B, there is no ebb and flow to anything he's doing. It's just pure chaos.
Because there's no preparation.
No preparation. And I want to ask you the biggest question. I know this will be where we probably, I'll get some fan mail and some hate mail. Brian, I think you are who you are, as the great Bill Parcells once said. And I think it's very much, this is probably who Tony Romo was as a quarterback. I think this is probably why some of his failures, I doubt that his preparation was great. I think it was chaos. I think it was unscripted. I think it was just street ball and broken plays and all this crap.
That's why I brought it up, because the similarities to his playing career. Can I ask you a question? Tell me how Tony Romo, 4 to 5 years into his broadcasting career, where he has been paid the farm, is any better as a product than it was on day one when it was a novelty act and a fad.
It's not. It's the exact same thing.
I don't think he has changed or grown or improved a lick.
And Brian, tell me how Tony Romo on day one as a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys was any better than on the day he left the Dallas Cowboys.
And the results were the exact the results were also the exact same as they had been.
Yes, and I think, Brian, this brings us to our bigger point. as we evaluate what is a Super Bowl that nobody and their mom would have guessed that the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm so happy for my brother-in-law, Jeff. I'm so happy for him.
I'm
And the
happier for
people-
your sister, Kira, just for the record.
Kira too. Well, Kira's it's tough for Kira because Kira is a Cowboy fan, but she
Kira
loves
doesn't
the
have it so
Bengals
tough.
she loves the Bengals for her kids, and she loves it for the people of Cincinnati.
David, I'm a Cowboys fan and I love the Bengals.
Well, we know you love 25 teams. Listen, the point is, Brian, is that but what this situation brought in is that I think that what has become very obvious with the Bengals getting to the Super Bowl, in my opinion, Brian, and I look forward to this debate with you, I think it has killed a lot of the false myths out there of what needs to happen in order to be a Super Bowl team. And I think it accentuated and put an exclamation point on one point that you do need to be a Super Bowl team. Ready? Follow me on this one, Brian. One, the myths that you need a great offensive line, which we hear over and over again. The Bengals have a very bad offensive line. They were 17th ranked this season. They gave up a team record in the history of the Cincinnati Bengals. 55 sacks this year on Joe Burrow. He was getting destroyed. Last year, the man had a horrible season-ending knee injury where he had 3 different ligaments in his knee explode on him because he was getting killed by the lack of blocking. Okay, that is myth number 1. They did it without a great offensive line.
Are we going through these as you go on, or are you want me to?
Well, I can throw it all out there. You can deal with it point by point, whatever you would like. But these are the myths, in my opinion.
Okay, I think so. I won't elaborate. I won't go too deep, but there is something to what you're saying on the offensive line. You don't have to have the best offensive line. I do agree.
Correct. And this one isn't even a bad offensive line. This isn't even an average offensive line. This is a bad offensive line.
And that's where we may disagree. I think they're average because last year I would argue that they literally got him killed.
Right, but this
was
year,
Joe Burrow's second or third year.
Getting up 8 sacks in a game. I mean,
David, was this his second or third year?
Second. This is
so last year's when he got hurt.
Right.
So I think last year his offensive line was
so
bad.
This year, I mean, again, he got injured
but
last year.
He shouldn't have been on the field last year. It was so bad. Take away the sack numbers. Yesterday, who was it? The Rams defense had 0 sacks.
Right.
Okay. That obviously they played better than a team. You can't just look at that number.
I agree, except when it's historical, Brian, and it's the team record of the history of the franchise, man.
Fine. But I do agree that because you're not running the ball behind that line like you used to, strategically it matters less in this day and age.
Correct. Joe Mixon had a little over 1,200 yards this season. That's with the extra game. So all the numbers are now pushed forward.
Going into the season, well, he was the 3rd leading rusher, right? Or 4th.
Yeah, and Joe Mixon averaged per carry 4.1 yards per game, which isn't like record-breaking outstanding numbers. It's
nobody thought he was a top 15. I mean, in fantasy drafts, which is a good indicator, he was like the 10th to 12th running back pick.
Correct. But again, my point is that his numbers, while good and solid, it's not like they were groundbreaking where you say, again, you're showing an offensive line that did a okay average. I think average is the best thing to say.
Joe Mixon, behind that average offensive line, had the 3rd most rushing yards, 1,205.
Well, you have to look at the number of carries he got, and also 4.1 average per carry is the big number you have to look at, and that's decent, but it's not outstanding.
Correct. He had 292 rushes.
Right. So Brian, sticking with the offensive line, defensively, how good were the Bengals honestly this year?
I think they were average.
Average. So the idea that you have to have a top defense, the Bengals put that myth to rest because they did a lot of bend, no break. It wasn't like they were doing anything incredibly, inventive with their schemes or anything. Okay. And Brian, finally, let's look at the star power. Okay. They have a second-year quarterback who is the number one pick in the league. He comes off this horrible injury. They have a budding superstar at wide receiver. They have a pretty good.
I think he's a superstar.
I agree. They have a good running back, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's Eric Dickerson over here, okay? And other than that, they're really using a bunch of guys like T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd and people like that who we sit there and say, okay, they're decent, but they're not like, we're not talking about weapons like you and I would be talking about
with 50 different guys in the league is number two.
Exactly right. This isn't Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, even Edwards later. Okay,
and Jamar Chase is their superstar, and he was unstoppable.
Matthew on defense, Brian. There's no, none of that is existing here. So my point, Brian, is the myths that have been fed to us. And not just in Dallas, but we live here over and over again about you need a great offensive line. You need a superstar pass rush. You need a superstar running back. You need a superstar secondary. Brian, all of that, the Bengals are literally putting to rest with what they've done. And, Brian, they did it without home field advantage. Okay, they went 2 weeks in a row. They won on the road, and technically they're going to have to do it again in the Super Bowl.
They do have Chidobe Awuzie.
They do have Chidobe Awuzie. And Brian, I will tell you the one myth that is backed up by the Bengals getting to the Super Bowl that I do agree with. And I think this is, Brian, the thing that our listeners, that Cowboy fans, that NFL fans need to focus on the most. In the last 30 years, Brian, in the last 40 years, Brian, since the Bengals last were in the Super Bowl, there has been one quarterback, count them with your finger, that has really had success in the NFL not being drafted high or in the first couple of rounds, and his name is Tom Brady. And he is the exception to a million rules and every rule. When you look at all these other quarterbacks, the Joe Burrows, the Pat Mahomes, Brian, the Matthew Stafford, and on and on and on.
As we did with Mike Rookwood 2 weeks ago.
Yes, but some of that pod didn't make it, so we got to go back over this. These guys are the top picks. These guys are the top guys. And yes, there are some that end up being bust and some because of circumstance that don't make it. But none of these guys that are getting to
not all of them are. So just because you're picking a top 3 quarterback in the draft doesn't mean you're going to the Super Bowl. But if you don't have one, it almost guarantees you're definitely not going.
Not going to the Super Bowl. So enough
without one.
And on the heels, Brian, of today, the Cowboys restructuring Dak Prescott's contract, and on the heels of all the other crap that we listen to, Brian, I think we have come during this playoffs and Super Bowl again. And unfortunately, here's what I'll say. I think there's a lot more Cowboy fans who are buying into what I'm saying now than they were a month and a half to 2 months ago, which is, Brian, we have now seen the special crop of the new generation. The special crop of the new generation is Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen. These guys are the new crop.
But you could say that Dak fits in that.
He doesn't.
If he had the results, you would.
Yeah, but the problem is,
look at him. I'm saying, look at him. He's young. He's young. He's mobile. Isn't that what you're sort of talking about?
He's not young anymore.
But isn't that what you're talking about with Allen and this crap?
No, I'm talking about that these are all guys that were high draft picks. These were all guys that fit the mold
Which
of what
Dak
you and I are talking about.
which by all indications are Dak would have been had not for
But
the
he
police
wasn't.
allegations
But
or
he
whatever.
wasn't. But he wasn't. But he wasn't.
I know. I
So
know.
let's deal with facts. Let's deal with
He
facts.
wasn't
Because
factually,
Brian,
but there
Brian, I don't buy that.
but
Though,
it
but I don't
wasn't a
buy that
talent.
story. But Brian, I don't buy that story because
Why?
we've seen too many guys come through the draft who had serious allegations and things far worse than Dak, who because of their talent and the way that they were evaluated by the scouts, they were taking a chance on in those first couple of rounds.
But the
Dak
Cowboys,
wasn't.
but the Cowboys in that draft, if I recall correctly, weren't in a position to take a quarterback in the first round, no matter who it was.
Well, they tried and they failed. Remember?
And so, right. So then they weren't going to take a quarterback at all.
So then they built this story that
This
Jerry
case, the
Jones is
narrative.
so good at, the narrative. But I'm telling you, take all of the Barnum and Bailey stuff.
When was the
out of
last
it.
time the Cowboys drafted a first round quarterback? Aikman?
You got it, Troy Aikman. And what happened?
He won 3 Super Bowls.
You got it. So
But I don't know that there's a corollary.
I think there's a huge correlation because when is the last time that the Buffalo Bills were relevant in the NFL? When they drafted Tim Kelly. When is the last time that the Cincinnati Bengals were relevant in the NFL? When they drafted Boomer Esiason. I disagree. I think there is a very
do you think the Bengals with the Cowboys
and the
defense?
Lions got it right. They just happen to be the Detroit Lions.
Do you think the Bengals?
Stafford.
Do you think the Bengals are better with the Cowboys defense than what they had yesterday?
Yes. I think if the Bengals had the Cowboys weapons, if Joe Burrow had the offensive weapons of the Cowboys and the Cowboys defense, I think that I think you are seeing the greatness of Joe Burrow. I think you are seeing how good he is.
How many of their starting 11 on defense can you name?
None. No, that's not true.
You probably named 2. Yeah.
Eli Apple. I can tell you Eli Apple.
And Chidobe Awuzie.
Actually, Eli Apple. And I want to say a shout out to the Rams going to his second Super Bowl, SMU's own Justin Lawler. I'm proud. Good for him, brother.
Can I read you the starting defensive line for the Bengals?
Do you disagree with what I'm saying here?
I do. Okay. I disagree with parts of it. And I disagree with the extent that you're taking the story to. I don't disagree with the premise.
But why? Because the numbers back me up, though.
Because I think there's more that you need than a quarterback. And the second
I didn't say you needed more. I'm saying that without that top drafted quarterback, unless you hit the lotto once every 50 years with Tom Brady and it doesn't exist, you have no chance.
But I think that you could trade. Are you saying that you can trade for a top guy?
Yes, you can trade like the Rams did. But my point is, people who want to it's fair to blame Jerry Jones, but blame Jerry Jones for the right things. Don't blame Jerry Jones for the made up stuff. Don't blame Jerry Jones by saying, offensive line or running back. Blame Jerry Jones because every Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl winner has had a top drafted quarterback. Don Meredith, Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman. Since Troy Aikman, Jerry has tried to do it his way, and it doesn't work. And the other teams that have tried to do it their way, Brian, it didn't work. It only works with a high drafted guy.
Okay, let me ask you one question.
How did Tampa Bay win their Super Bowl?
If San Francisco yesterday, a couple bounces go the other way, and Jimmy G's in the Super Bowl, and he beats the Bengals, which would have been 50-50, how does your argument face then?
But it didn't happen.
But it was, but he was in the Final Four.
Where was Jimmy G? Where was Jimmy G drafted? That's a good question. That I don't know.
57-ish.
Oh,
like
so
mid
Jimmy
to
G
late
was
second round. No, 62.
Yeah.
62.
Yeah, so that's what I said. I said if you're a top 2-3 round draft pick, then that's okay. I don't
See,
have a problem with that.
bottom of the second round.
I'm thinking about drafting undrafted dudes and trying to go into 4th and 5th and 6th rounds, going against the grain of what the
I
people
have
are
a
telling
bigger
me.
problem with your argument if it's I feel like you have a point if it's a top 10 draft pick.
No, I
on one of
disagree.
these.
That's not what I'm saying.
I
That's
know,
not
but
what
I
I'm
think
saying.
that's what you need to make it where
I don't think so, because you've had success. The history shows us that guys who weren't top 10 but were still in the first couple of rounds can be successful. I think it's when you try
but
to
they don't
make,
win Super Bowls.
they get there. They get there.
Like who? I mean, I'm
What
gonna
do you
pull
mean?
this. Who?
Aaron Rodgers,
Where
Eli
he was
Manning,
first. Aaron Rodgers was a first round draft pick.
late in the first round.
Right. Eli was a
Late
first
in the
round.
first round.
Eli was a first round draft pick.
Right. If I'm not mistaken, Boomer Esiason was a second round. If I'm not mistaken, let's go down the list.
Eli was 1-1. Eli was first round number 1 pick.
No. I'm going down the list. I'm saying
I know, but
go
you
down
said
the list of, did I say Eli? No, Aaron Rodgers. Russell Wilson was a first rounder, not top 10.
hold on. Aaron Rodgers was 24.
24.
Right after Fabian Washington and right before Jason Campbell.
There you go. What was Russell Wilson? 15, 16?
He was interesting. Round 3, pick 75.
There you go.
No. Now I feel like you're.
No, I have said over and over again, if you're not getting a quarterback in the first few rounds and they're top rated guys, then you are not being successful. That's my point.
What is the difference, honestly?
Where did Tony Romo get picked?
He's an undrafted free agent.
Where did Dak Prescott get picked?
4th round. That's my question.
Where
So
did
what?
Chad Hutchinson get picked?
Was he drafted?
Exactly. Where did Drew Henson get picked?
He may have
And
been.
on with
Hold
the
on.
Cowboys.
What is the difference between Drew Henson was selected in the 3rd round, 97th?
Yes, and he sucks. My point is there is not, I would challenge you to find me one guy that was picked after the 3rd round in the NFL draft
what is the
that has
difference?
won a Super Bowl other than Tom Brady and had consistent success. It doesn't
Chad
exist.
Hutchinson, 1st round, 26th.
And he failed. That's my point. So they didn't even
Of
have
the baseball amateur draft.
of the amateur. Brian,
Here's my question though.
Brian, who are all the guys that have won Super Bowls? Let's look at it.
Hold on.
Where was Nick Foles drafted? Where was Nick Foles drafted?
Answer me just what is the difference between being picked late 3rd round and in the 4th round? Because that seems like it's your arbitrary denomination.
No. I'm saying to you, no, and forget about Dak. Forget about Dak. It's everyone. It's every NFL team.
Why is it the end of the 3rd round as your delineation?
If you don't get picked, if you are not picked before the first 3 rounds as an NFL quarterback, it means that there is some reason, some sort of bad something that the people in the scouts say.
So at 97,
when
it goes from pick 96 to pick 97, and literally
I'm telling you that if you can't make it in the first 100 picks of the NFL draft, and you're a quarterback and you're supposed to be a franchise quarterback and some superstar at the quarterback position, there is probably a reason that the scouts got it right.
Now, okay, so now you've allowed for the first 4 picks of the 4th round. My point is,
no, I'm using because you said 96 or 97.
I know,
my point is,
but that's my point.
History backs me up. Find me the quarterback that went after the 3rd round that has been successful by winning a Super Bowl or being a great quarterback.
We're gonna find out if Dak.
It doesn't exist. It's Tom Brady.
But if you were to say it has.
When was Nick Foles drafted?
3rd round, 88th.
Thank you. When was Carson Wentz drafted? When was any of these guys?
Carson was a top 10, probably.
First round pick. That's my point. So if in the last 40 years, Brian,
second overall,
my hypothesis doesn't work. If in the last 40 years, find me the quarterback who went out there, was a great quarterback that was picked in the 4th round or later. There's one man, his name is Tom Brady. That's the guy. So that tells you that the numbers back it up. You're trying to go against the grain. You're trying to go, everything in football is numbers. Everything. There is
I
a
think
reason.
that you're data mining though, because I don't think there's a
Say what
difference.
you want. I'm using the Cowboys because it's easy for people in this place to understand.
Well, that's the most relevant to us example.
Yes.
And it's
So the Cowboys, the Cincinnati Bengals have now gotten to the Super Bowl quicker than the Dallas Cowboys since the last time the Cowboys went. How did they do it? And what has kept the Cincinnati Bengals out of the Super Bowl picture for the last 40 years? What they had Marvin Lewis.
That's it.
There's
your second.
right? They had Carson Palmer. It didn't work out. They were trying to do it that way. And when they finally find the success they need, Brian, and they have, let's be honest, a pretty average football team for the most part, they have a top flight quarterback. The teams that have made it all had top flight quarterbacks and within the first 3 rounds.
And a winning head coach. That's critical.
No, but not really. Why is the Bengals coach a winning head coach?
Well, he's one of these young guys. He's not Marvin Lewis. So
Marvin Lewis was a Super Bowl winning coordinator.
Different.
You're not going to hear me disagree with you. I agree with you.
I'm saying Zach Taylor's young. We don't know what he is.
Right, we have no idea.
But
correct.
I can pretty much tell you that Marvin Lewis is your average Joe Blow coach that has a great life in the NFL, 30 years. And there's a difference between there are very few spots in the Super Bowl.
I agree. But I think
you need a guy both that the players believe in, the willing to fight for, and one that can manage the clock in this NFL.
I agree. But again, my point to you, Brian, and saying what I say is, why are the Dallas Cowboys trying to do things that don't represent the glory of the past, that don't represent the numbers that back you up in the NFL? And the Bengals have gone out there and shown you. I don't want to hear
They must just believe in the story of Dak and the ability to market him.
Yeah, and Romo too, and all the others that have
got to be it.
But that shows you that they're not doing it based off of the numbers. They're not doing it based off of the history of the previous success.
It's very similar.
I think what the Bengals have done is shown you all I've heard about, Brian. You and I have spoken about it. All I hear around here for years and years, we don't have the running back. We don't have the offensive line. We don't have the defensive line. We don't have the secondary. We don't have the coach, and on and on and on and on. And you know what the Bengals are proving? No, you don't have the quarterback. You don't have the quarterback. The number one reason why you're not in the Super Bowl, Brian, is because you don't have the most important position covered the way all these other teams with success have done it, minus Thomas Brady.
And the Bengals were gifted an epic collapse by a loser in Patrick Mahomes.
I'm staying out of that. He won a Super Bowl. I'm not going to say he's a loser.
My point exactly. I mean, they were.
I don't think you're giving Cincinnati enough credit. They made some unbelievable adjustments at halftime that people have been talking about this morning.
They were good, yes, and they flummoxed Patrick Mahomes. But that collapse at 21-3 is probably the biggest collapse in AFC Championship history.
Well, yeah, that's because the Buffalo Bills one didn't happen in AFC Championship.
It went to the Super Bowl. I wasn't thinking that, but seriously, 21-3, they were 96% to win the game. I mean,
I agree, but I don't think that was based off of Mahomes' bad play. I think that was based off a lot of what the Bengals were doing, because the Bengals went from being Swiss cheese to the second half making some great adjustments in the secondary.
All of a sudden, Mahomes looked like Dak Prescott. His throws were sailing.
Okay, let's be honest. Nobody looks as bad as Dak Prescott.
His throws were sailing. They were like air balls to center field. It was very reminiscent.
He looked a little like that. Well, you know what happened? He looked a little like the, but give the Bengals credit. He looked a little like the Pat Mahomes that played them earlier in the season in the second half. And
I'm
again,
fascinated by the
you know who
matchup.
didn't look like that, Brian? Joe Burrow didn't look like that. Joe Burrow didn't look like that. And again, this goes back to Brian. I'm making a very simple statement. You can substitute the Cowboys in for anybody.
Well,
If
they
you
didn't commit penalties.
Yep. Yep.
They kept fighting down. They
Yep.
didn't lose their cool.
And did you notice, Brian, by the way, did you notice
They just
something?
kept playing.
Our friend Aaron Gottlieb, who loves to blame the officials and watch the officials like anything, do you notice that watching these games, especially the Bills, Chiefs last week, all of the semifinals leading up to the conference championship game, did you notice how much cleaner of a football game these teams are playing? How much more disciplined they all
That's
are?
what I'm saying.
Right,
If Cincinnati has 6 pre-snap penalties, a hold, and 3 pass interferences yesterday, they don't win the game. I promise you.
No, they don't. And I think, Brian, that is, to me, that's what I think that everything you and I talk about on a week in, week out basis, I think
the Niners aren't more talented than the Packers or the Rams.
And let's go further. Let's go further. I'm not convinced that the Bengals aren't more talented than the Dallas Cowboys. They're just better prepared. They're better coached, and they have a better quarterback. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
And they don't do stupid things.
And Brian, but that's why I don't want to listen to nonsense from Cowboy fans or football fans who want to tell me you need some secret formula for success. No, you don't. You need a great player at the most important position on the field. You need a competent coach, a disciplined team. And Brian, that is why, Brian, Tom Brady and the New England Patriots had so much success for so long. It wasn't that they had all these superstar players, Brian. They had a great quarterback at the most important position, and they had a great coach, and they always had a very disciplined team. That's what they had. And yes, here and there, they got some really good players through there. But guess what, Brian? If we look at the last, it's now been how many years, Brian, since the Cowboys won the Super Bowl?
96. So let me do
how many Hall of Fame players, Brian? How many Hall of Fame players, either currently in or to be inducted, played in that time period for the Dallas Cowboys? I bet you it's as many as any team in the NFL.
12 to 15?
I bet you it's as many, if not more, than almost every team in the NFL. So you can't say they haven't had the talent. But you know what they haven't had, Brian? A Hall of Fame quarterback. And all of the teams that have won the Super Bowl, Brian, minus the Philadelphia Eagles, okay, and that whatever you want to call it, minus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Brad Johnson, minus the Baltimore Ravens with Trent Dilfer. All those other teams, Brian, are Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Joe Burrow, if he keeps this up, one day will be a Hall of Famer, okay? Matthew Stafford, he has a real shot at being a Hall of Famer. I would say, Brian, who won last year? Tom Brady, Hall of Famer. Pat Mahomes is going to be a Hall of Famer. Eli Manning, Hall of Famer, and on and on and on, Brian. These are Hall of Fame quarterbacks that have won these Super Bowls, man.
So first of all, you don't have to win 13 games to make it to the Super Bowl. The Bengals won.
Advantage, Brian.
The Bengals were 10-7 and won their crappy division.
Mm-hmm.
And are playing well at the right time. Since 2016.
Brian, you can't use injuries as an excuse. This guy had one of the worst injuries there was last year. People were questioning whether he was going to ever be able to come back and reach potential. Well, guess what? He looks as good right now as he's ever looked, Joe Burrow. So you can't use, his knee exploded, what he could have been. Didn't matter, did it, Brian? Didn't matter.
In 2015, the Bengals won their division and lost in the wild card game.
Yep.
Okay. Since then, in the 6 seasons that culminated yesterday, they went 6-9-1. 7-9, both seasons finishing third out of 4. Then a 6-10 in 2018, finished last in the division. 2-14 in 2019, last in the division.
2-14.
They got Burrow last year, 4-11-1, last in the division. All of a sudden, within a year, win the division, 10-7, 2 road games and a Super Bowl appearance, and a chance at the title.
And what changed, Brian?
Quarterback and coach through that.
You got it. You got it. It wasn't like, hey, the Bengals had some defenses that were pretty damn good in the last 20 years. Those teams didn't have success. What were they missing, Brian?
You know, Mixon's been their leading rusher for 5 years.
Yes, sir. And Joe Mixon, let's not pretend like Joe Mixon, Brian, is the second coming of whoever, okay? He's a good NFL running back. Nobody was talking about Joe Mixon. Nobody's talking about Joe Mixon, man. Nobody's coming out of yesterday's game talking about Joe Mixon.
Or Samaje
Perine, okay? Nobody's talking. Joe Mixon was being talked about because he had a great left to right hook, okay? That's why people were talking about Joe Mixon.
So here's the question. They've been to 2 Super Bowls. We all remember Joe Montana just crushing their souls in 88. And then their other appearance
90 was a rough one. 90 was a rough one.
Against the
Joe Montana, one more time.
Oh, they were both against the Niners. You're right.
You don't bring up Joe Montana to Cincinnati Bengals fans.
So what is going to be different?
It's so crazy that the Niners were almost there with them. Bengals were going to have PTSD.
That's what I was hoping for, was that Niners Bengals. So what do you think? Now we talk a little bit about
Brian, how crazy is it that we are now at Super Bowl what? What is this, Super Bowl
56?
How crazy is it that for 54 years, Brian, the home team never hosted a Super Bowl, and now 2 years in a row, the home team is hosting the Super Bowl? How nuts is that?
It's insane. And were you able to hear any of the public address announcer over that nonsense yesterday? This guy is so obnoxious. I wonder if he is going to have to tone it down because they're not technically the home team.
He's like, what's his name, Brian, at the Mavs games? The guy before Sean Heath, who was the guy for years that was nuts.
Yeah. Not Kevin.
No, he had like Mad Dog, or he had a nickname. He was a DJ.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was like out of control, like, Mad Dog, let me hear ya.
Yep. And it was just the biggest S show. So the Rams, the last time the Rams won a title.
Yep. St. Louis. The greatest show on turf.
Kurt Warner, right? Against the Titans.
Yep.
Was that their only?
Yes, because they went back again against the Patriots and lost.
Well, I don't know about you. I would love to see Matt Stafford win it. I have no ill towards either of these 2 teams.
I agree. They're both likable teams. Probably I will obviously root for the Bengals because of the family connections, and it's such a great story. But, Brian, I also think that it's the small market mentality, the Mike Brown, who people have just gone crazy about in Cincinnati for years, can't stand him, can't stand the family, hate the way, similar to the Joneses, the nepotism and all that. But you look at the other side, and the Rams are trying to buy themselves a championship, similar to what Tampa Bay did. And it might work, because the Rams have more talent. But I do think the Bengals have the better quarterback.
And I think the Bengals may have that intangible that you can't.
Yeah, I think the Bengals may have the better coach, by the way. Sean
McVay yesterday at times. Did you see him? He looked like a deer in the headlights.
But boy, Sean McVay's got the hottest fiance.
Oh, and you have Evan McPherson, the kicker.
Yeah, and how about that? You draft a kicker. Everybody laughed at the Bengals. You know what it reminded me of, Brian? It reminded me of the people in fantasy who laugh when someone takes a kicker early, and then that kicker ends up being the best kicker. And you're not laughing when that kicker's getting 13 or 14
What else would
points
they
in a
have gotten in the
fantasy game.
5th round? Some guy you've never heard of.
The Bengals get a guy who is clutch city. You think the Cowboys wouldn't have taken him this year?
You think that that's not making an impact, whereas the 6th linebacker that they picked would have never made the roster?
And Brian, they paid Greg Zuerlein a hell of a lot more than the Bengals are playing Mr. McPherson. I'll tell you that much.
Yep. So before we go, do you have a prediction yet, or are we going to save that until next week?
I think we're going to save the prediction. Let's let it fester. We know we're going to have our Super Bowl palooza, Brian. I'm a little concerned, Brian. The winds of cold are sweeping into the Metroplex later this week.
I can't wait.
I don't know. Shout out, Brian, to my buddy here, who's the voice of the Bulldogs and Lady Bulldogs. Senior night is tomorrow. Excited about that for all of my Yavna Bulldogs out there. They've earned it. They've worked really hard. Off to a good start, Brian. Our ladies are doing as well as they've done. Our guys are 6-0, undefeated in the district, trying to make a run again. I think we got a really good team this year.
Also,
Brian,
championship on deck this year, possibly.
You know, I would never be one to say that anything. You can't just throw around things like state championship, but I do think we are going to be a very tough out. Is the best way that I can put it. But there's some really good teams out there that we're going to have to go up against. But my hope is that if we can take care of district, then we won't have to leave the Metroplex, which would be really nice until the Final Four. That would be helpful.
Where's the Final Four this year?
I believe Waco, back in Waco. I do, Brian, the one thing I do want to bring up, and I think it's very important for all of us to just mention, is I do think that this last 2 weeks of the NFL playoffs were probably the best that the NFL has given us. Maybe I would have to go back, right? It might be the best ever in my lifetime.
Just drama, every game.
I was expecting, Brian. Well, you could go further than that, Brian. You could say every weekend. You could say every weekend so far in the NFL playoffs has given
the wild
drama.
Card games. There were a couple of.
The Cowboy Niner game, regardless.
No, that was drama, right?
Yeah, every week you have had drama. You've had intrigue. You've had stories. I really, it is very rare that any professional sports postseason lives up to the hype, and it has been awesome. And I'll be totally honest with you, it was so much fun for me, Brian, yesterday. I have not done this, and part of that is because of fantasy, part of that is because of scheduling and other stuff. But to be able to sit down yesterday and watch from start to finish both AFC and NFC championship games and be thoroughly entertained and focused in on them from start to finish, I have probably not done that since I was a kid. So that speaks volumes of it, and it was awesome, and it really made me like.
And you had no allegiance
to. I still love football. I still like. Right, it wasn't the Cowboys playing. I mean,
and this
it wasn't.
This is 20 weeks into the season. Like, you've been watching it for 4.5 months, and
I was as invested and more invested yesterday and in the last couple weeks than I was during the whole season, and it was so much fun.
Ultimately, it comes down to they have found a way to turn their product through the television into one where you can except
for Tony Romo.
Well, are they stuck with him?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's all the talk about what's going to happen with Amazon running football, and is Troy Aikman going to jump ship and everything. They're stuck with him, but Brian, you're far more into social media and what the media, the national media is saying and all that stuff. But I cannot believe, at least from my small bubble and what I've heard, and people who were so high on Tony Romo the first few games he did that first season, what I've heard from them and in my little bubble, I don't hear almost anyone that thinks he's good or entertaining, or I mean, the majority of people I hear now, they don't even say he's entertaining. They're more negative. They're like, it's horrible to listen to him. What is your experience?
He's not even entertaining. People have turned quickly, and the majority are on my side and your side
For
now.
every Ben Rogers, Brian, I feel like there's 30 people who are like, mute this dude.
Absolutely. So we have two tragic news of the week stories.
Womp, 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 Brian Scott's tragic news of the week.
The first is we will go to Africa.
Oh, here we go.
Have you been following the AFCON, the African Cup
I know
of
I
Nations
haven't, but I've been
tournament?
very proud of the Liverpool Reds that without Mane and Salah have still been doing very well.
And Mohamed Salah put the Egyptians into the semifinals yesterday, along with.
You want to talk about a team with one player? That's a team with
one player, correct. But what happened last week in a Sweet 16 matchup in Yaoundé, there was a deadly stadium crush in which there were 8 fatalities.
Oh, God.
In the Cameroon Comoros match. Did you even know that Comoros was a country?
Never even heard of Comoros.
Here's the problem. 38 injuries, 8 deaths. Now, they didn't stop the tournament, okay. They didn't even postpone. They played the damn game.
Stop.
Swear to God, they played. You gotta play the game.
Brian, you know what this reminds me of?
With the blood still warm.
Brian, you know what this reminds me of? Your favorite lie. Your favorite 3 words.
They're all gone.
Exactly. See, I didn't even, that's what that reminds me.
They're all gone.
How the hell do you still play the game?
They played the game that day. After about an hour, they got everybody seated.
That's
Unbelievable.
horrible.
Nothing better than a good stadium crush.
That is
Second,
horrible.
It never gets old. It's got to
no.
be mentioned every year.
Oh, no.
73 seconds in, we can count them down if you want. January 28th, 1986, Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher to go in
Here
space.
we go again.
And the Challenger disaster. You can go on YouTube. I can recommend a documentary.
We know, Brian.
But 36 years ago, Francis Scobie commanded his final mission.
Brian, do you want to quote Reagan?
Yes, but because you asked me, I'll let you.
No, you
amongst
were the Challenger
across
expert.
the pearly gates of heaven.
Not pearly gates of heaven. Will you look it up and say it, for God's sake?
Yes.
Our pod people, you should know that quote.
I know, but I know. We will never forget them, nor the last we saw them. Oh, that was just okay. Here we go. Hold on.
Can you do your best Ronald Reagan impersonation when you say that?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Thank God.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, I love that this is on video now, so people can see the glee that you have in this.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God in heaven.
There you go.
And on that note, we'll see you next
week. They all have schools named after them.
They're all gone. And we will see you for Super Bowl Palooza. Thanks for joining us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. David, have a good one. We'll talk to you next week.